You can always tell when a K9 dog senses something off. It's in the eyes. That look that cuts straight through. You're calm like a scalpel. And that night, as Diesel locked his gaze on the back of the garbage truck, Officer Jake Nolan felt a ripple of dread roll down his spine. It was supposed to be just another end of shift stroll, a 10-minute walk under the frostbitten glow of street lamps before heading home to heat up leftovers and collapse into bed. But Diesel had other plans. And thank God he did. Because 10 FT from a roaring garbage truck on the edge of a silent neighborhood, a life, was about to vanish without a sound. Unless someone listened. Jake tugged at the leash. Come on, buddy. Let's go. But Diesel didn't move. The retired K9 stood, rooted on the curb, ears pinned forward, muscles coiled tight. Then, without warning, he barked. Not a casual woof. Not a playful yap. This was a full-throated, chest-rattling bark. Sharp, rapid, angry. Again. 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 The driver of the sanitation truck, a heavy-set man in a neon vest, stepped down from the cab, looking annoyed. You okay over there? Jake raised a hand. Sorry, he's usually calm. Something must have spooked him. But Diesel wasn't spooked. He was alerting. Jake hadn't seen that stance in years. Not since Afghanistan. Back then, when Diesel barked like that, it meant explosives or worse. But this was small-town Indiana, not a war zone, not even a crime scene. So why did Jake suddenly feel like something horrible was about to happen? The truck rumbled forward a few feet, its hydraulic arms gripping a large black bin. Diesel lunged toward it, barking wildly. Okay, 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 Jake muttered, stepping between the dog and the trash can. What is it? What the hell's going on? He placed a hand on Diesel's shoulder. Was trembling. At that moment, the truck's engine gave a guttural roar and the bin began to rise. Diesel barked. Louder, more desperate now. Wait, Jake shouted, his hand shooting up toward the driver. Stop the lift. The driver slammed the emergency brake. What's the problem? But Diesel had already lunged toward the rear tire, teeth bared, barking into the darkness. Jake's pulse pounded. He drew his flashlight and approached the lifted bin, now hanging midair, swaying. Something scraped. Inside, something light, something alive. He climbed up the rear step of the truck, peered into the bin, and froze. It was faint, muffled by layers of paper and rags, but unmistakable. Sound, not mechanical, not metallic, a whimper, a cry, a baby's cry. Jake didn't think, he reacted. He shouted for the driver to lower the bin. Together, the two men yanked it down and tore open the lid. Cold air spilled out along with the reek of damp cloth and something coppery. Blood. Jake shoved aside a layer of newspapers, then a towel, then another. His breath caught there. Curled into a fetal ball inside a torn blanket was a baby, a newborn, tiny, blue-lipped, eyes shut tight, a weak cry fluttering out of his lungs like air from a punctured balloon. Jake staggered back a step. For a second, the world went quiet. Then training kicked in. Call EMS now. Jake barked at the driver. Tell them it's a newborn. Hypothermic, possibly injured. He pulled off his jacket and wrapped the baby tight, cradling the fragile body against his chest. Diesel stood nearby, Silent now, tail down, eyes locked on. The baby. Protective, watchful. Jake crouched beside him. You did good, boy. You did real good. If stories like this move you, hit that subscribe button too. Heroes for Animals. We share real stories of animal instinct, human courage, and second chances every week. Don't miss what these amazing dogs are doing behind the scenes. The ambulance came screaming down Maple Street 5 minutes later. But those 5 minutes felt like hours. Jake sat on the curb, holding the baby in his arms, whispering gently, trying to keep it awake. Hey, there. You're okay now. You're going to be okay. The paramedics took over with practiced speed, oxygen, warm blankets, a neonatal 4. The driver of the garbage truck stood off to the side, pale and shaking. I didn't hear a thing. Didn't see nothing. If your dog hadn't. Jake nodded, not trusting his voice. After the ambulance pulled away, Jake stayed behind to help the local officers canvass the area. It was a quiet neighborhood, the kind where porch lights flicker and no one locks their doors. The kind of place where a baby should never end up in a trash bin. Diesel stood by Jake's side the whole time, silent, focused. The headlines the next day would call him a hero. But Jake already knew. He looked down at his old partner, the fur around his muzzle now turning gray. You never stopped being a soldier, huh? Diesel didn't wag, didn't move. He just kept watch like he always had. Jake didn't sleep that night. After the baby was rushed to St. Mary's Medical Center, after the official statements, after the quiet walk back to the cruiser with Diesel riding silently in the back seat like he always had. During his prime, Jake found himself sitting at his kitchen table in the dark, staring at nothing. The wind howled against the windows. December had bitten down hard on Indiana that week, and even the heat groaned trying to keep. On the floor beside him, Diesel finally exhaled a long sigh and rested his head on Jake's boot. Jake muttered, "You always know, don't you?" He didn't need an answer. He'd seen it in war zones, in back alleys, in barns filled with fear and silence. Diesel never barked without reason. But this was different. A baby in a trash bin. And seconds later, and the truck would have compacted everything inside. That child would have been another nameless headline, another unsolved tragedy, and no one would have known except Diesel. The next morning, Jake returned to the site. He hadn't been able to shake the feeling. Something still sat wrong. The sidewalk was bare now, the garbage truck long gone. But Jake parked the cruiser, clipped Diesel's leash, and walked the block slowly. A jogger passed. A woman, pushing a stroller, nodded. "Hello." Boys biked past on their way to school. It was as if nothing had happened. But someone in this neighborhood had done something unthinkable, and Jake needed to understand why. He crouched near the spot where Diesel had first barked. The scent trail would be long gone. But Diesel was pacing in a slow circle now, sniffing, tail half raised, alert, but not alarmed. They turned the corner. Green bin sat by a mailbox, still full. Jake paused, then gently lifted the lid. Trash. Ordinary, but his gut said otherwise. "Let's take another lap," he murmured. Diesel turned without hesitation. It wasn't until they'd looped the block twice that Diesel froze. Again, this time in front of a white House with peeling shutters and a chain-link fence. The mailbox read, Connor. Jake recognized the name. Harold Connor was a retired steel worker, lived alone, kept mostly to himself, nothing on record, not even a parking ticket. Jake watched as Diesel sniffed along the curb, nose twitching. Then he sat down, quiet, alert. Jake scanned the porch. There on the third step sat something small and out of place. A torn corner of a baby wipe packet. He picked it up carefully, slipped it into a bag. Coincidence? Maybe. But then he spotted something else half hidden behind the bushes near the side of the house. A plastic grocery bag. He stepped over, crouched down, and pulled it free. Inside were strips of fabric stained with something dark. Blood, rust. It was hard to say. There was also an empty formula bottle, a cracked pacifier, and a crumpled note, written on ruled paper. The ink had bled from damp, but he could still make out the words, I'm sorry. Please don't hate me. I had no choice. Jake's hand tightened around the bag. He looked down at Diesel. Looks like you were right. Again. At the station, Jake logged the items into evidence and passed them to forensics. The message on the note was scanned, enhanced, and handed off to Detective Lana Brooks, who specialized in cases like this, quiet ones with loud consequences. Lana leaned against the doorway of Jake's office. You think the baby came from that house? She asked, voice low. Jake nodded. I think someone inside knew something. Whether they're the mother or just helped cover it up, I don't know yet. Lana tapped her notepad. You realize this could be way more than a teenage girl dumping a baby. This smells like coercion, maybe abuse. Jake didn't respond right away. He stared out the window where Diesel was resting under the squad car's shadow. He said, we were seconds away from losing that kid. Lana, I know. Later that day, they pulled the security footage from a neighbor's Ring camera. At exactly 3:12 a.m., a figure could be seen stepping out of the alley 2 houses down from the Connor place, hoodie up, shoulders hunched, carrying what looked like a large plastic container. They watched in silence as the figure turned the corner, placed the bin beside the curb, and walked away fast. Not running but not calm either. The camera didn't catch a clear face, but the height, the build, the posture, they were all consistent with someone young, a teenager, maybe even younger. Jake played the footage again, then again. There was something in the way the figure moved. Not careless, not hardened like a criminal, more like broken, panicked. Lana said, what Jake wouldn't. That's not someone dumping garbage. That's someone begging not to be seen. The next evening, Jake returned to the Connor residence with a warrant. Harold Connor wasn't home, but inside the back shed, partially buried beneath old lumber and beer crates, they found more of the same items: baby clothes, formula wrappers, a worn-out baby blanket embroidered with tiny stars. In the corner on a dusty desk was a half-used notebook filled with scribbles, and in the margins of one page, I can't tell anyone. He said he'd hurt the baby if I did. Jake's stomach turned. This wasn't just abandonment. This was a threat. Back at the station, Diesel rested on a folded blanket by Jake's desk, head tilted, eyes half closed. But when Jake spoke, the old dog's ears twitched. She didn't just Leave that baby. She was running, hiding him from someone. Diesel let out a soft huff. Jake leaned back, exhaustion tugging at his eyes, but the pieces were finally starting to fit. Whoever the girl was, she didn't want to be found, but she'd left just enough behind. Not out of carelessness, out of hope. That night, Jake couldn't shake the image. The baby's lips turning blue. Diesel barking so hard his chest heaved. They been lifting toward the compactor, and somewhere out there, a young girl hiding behind locked doors, convinced that giving up her child was safer than keeping him. What kind of world made a child think that? Jake stared out into the snow. We're not done yet, buddy, he said. Diesel thumped his tail once, as if to say, I know. The next 48 hours moved like a quiet storm, slow on the outside, but full of tension building underneath. Jake sat behind his desk at the station, Diesel curled up by the heater vent like he was guarding a secret. Outside, the December snow had thickened. Frost clung to windshields, and every breath hung in the air like a whisper, too scared to speak. The newborn, now known only as Baby Dew, remained in stable condition at St. Mary's, wrapped in warm blankets with tiny monitors blinking steadily at his side. The little boy was a miracle. Doctors said he was severely hypothermic, but otherwise unharmed. No signs of physical abuse, no drugs in his system, just cold, alone, and abandoned. But why? And by whom? Jake leaned forward and hit play on the footage. Again. There she was, the hooded figure. Same as before, 3:12 a.m. in grainy black and white, carrying the plastic bin, dropping it by the curb, walking away. But now, something caught his eye. As she turned, for just a moment, the street light hit the side of her face. Not enough to ID her, but enough to see the curve of a cheek, a soft jawline. Young, maybe 15, 16 at most. Not a criminal, a kid. Detective Lana Brooks walked into the room holding a file. Dropped it on Jake's desk and let out a breath. We ran the forensics from the baby blanket, she said. Traced it back to a hospital supply batch distributed to county clinics in Evansville and Linton. Meaning the girl gave birth in one of those clinics, probably. Used a fake name or no ID. Jake nodded. So she's local, scared, alone. Maybe hiding from someone. Lana hesitated. Being hidden by someone. That thought settled heavy in the room. They had the objects, the scene, the child, but they didn't have the girl, and that made Jake uneasy. That evening, Jake returned to the Connor house. The porch light was off, the windows drawn, but Diesel tugged at the leash again as they passed the side gate. Jake opened it slowly. The backyard was empty except for an old shed and scattered snow patches, but Diesel froze. Not near the shed, near the trash bins lined along the alley. Jake followed, scanning the area with his flashlight, and then he heard it. Not a baby's cry this time. A voice, soft, caught in the cold. I didn't want to hurt him. Jake stopped cold. He turned. There, behind the larger green bin, was a girl, teenage, thin, dirt on her jeans. Her hoodie pulled up around her face, eyes red from crying, arms wrapped tight across her chest like she was trying to hold herself together. Jake kept his voice low. It's okay. I'm not here to arrest you. She didn't speak. Diesel sat beside him, calm, not barking, not moving. Jake took a step forward. You the one who left the baby. Her shoulders twitched. I just wanted him to live, she whispered. Jake knelt in the snow. He's safe. He's at the hospital doing okay. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I didn't know what else to do. I couldn't take him home. He said if I told anyone, he'd make me disappear. Jake's heart stopped. Who said that? She shook her head. Doesn't matter. He's gone now. No, Jake said gently. It does matter. Because what you did, leaving your baby where someone might find him, that wasn't cruelty. That was desperation. He looked up at Diesel. He barked. Jake nodded. He saved your baby's life. Long silence. Then she whispered, Can I see him just once? Back at the station, Jake and Lana filed the paperwork to take the girl, Meline, into protective custody. She was 15, living in a foster home not 3 blocks from the alley where she'd dropped the bin. The man she was referring to, her foster father, a known alcoholic, no prior, but now under investigation. He'd told her that no one would help her, that she'd be thrown in juvie if she told anyone about the baby, that no one wanted girls like her to be mothers. He told her shame was her only option, so she carried the child alone. In silence, delivered in a borrowed clinic, wrapped him in an old blanket, and prayed someone might hear him cry before it was too late. 2 days later, Meline sat in a quiet pediatric room at St. Mary's. The baby, freshly bathed and bundled in yellow, slept soundly in his crib. His cheeks had color now. His fingers twitched as he dreamed. Jake stood by the door, watching. Diesel lay beside him like a sentinel. Meline reached out and touched her son's hand. Tears rolled down her face. I named him Theo, she said softly, after the nurse who held my hand during delivery. Jake cleared his throat. That's a good name. I still can't keep him, can I? She asked. Jake didn't lie. I don't know what's going to happen yet, but you did the right thing. That counts. Meline nodded. I thought no one would care. But your dog, he cared. Jake looked down at Diesel, who blinked slowly, resting his head on his paws. You know, Jake said, when he was younger, Diesel saved a lot of lives overseas. Found bombs before they could blow. Pulled men out of burning trucks. But this is something else. Meline smiled faintly. He's got a good heart. Jake smiled back. Yeah, he really does. Outside the hospital, snow fell in soft curtains across the windshield of Jake's cruiser. He didn't start the engine yet, just sat there for a moment. Everything had changed in a matter of days. A newborn saved, a young girl rescued from silence, and a K9 who, even in retirement, refused to stop listening. Some dogs never stop being heroes. They just wait for the next soul who needs saving. The hospital smelled like quiet. Not the antiseptic kind, but the hush that comes with rooms where people hold their breath, hoping for a miracle or bracing for heartbreak. Jake had spent more nights than he cared to count in places like this. Crime scenes, ERS, waiting rooms. But today was different. Today it wasn't about blood or bad guys. It was about something far more fragile. Second chance. He watched through the glass as Meline held her baby Theo in her arms. The nurses had shown her how to support his neck, how to feed him from a bottle. Her hands still trembled, but there was a softness in her face that hadn't been there before, like something broken inside her was slowly, carefully piecing itself back together. And beside Jake, as always, was Diesel, silent, watching, guarding. The CPS social worker arrived just after noon. Her name was Lauren Brandt. Sharp eyes, calm voice, clipboard tucked under one arm like a shield. 15 years old, no prenatal care, living under reported abuse. You've got a storm on your hands, Officer Nolan, she said as they walked down the hallway together. Jake gave a short nod. She needs protection, not judgment. I agree. That's why I pulled her file. Personally, Lauren replied. The foster father, Charles McKinley, has 3 other kids in the system, all placed in different homes. There were complaints before, but nothing ever stuck. Until Jake's jaw tightened. You think he'll come looking for her? Not if he knows what's good for him. But Jake had been around long enough to know people like McKinley didn't just disappear. They got angry. They got desperate. And desperate men were dangerous. That night, back at his house, Jake pulled out an old photo album. He sat on the floor beside Diesel, flipping through pages worn from time and sun, pictures of Afghanistan, of Diesel in body armor, of Jake younger, harder around the edges. One photo caught his eye. Diesel, lying beside a wounded soldier in the dust, refusing to move, even when gunfire cracked in the distance. You never left anyone behind, Jake said, scratching the gray behind Diesel's ears. Not then, not now. Diesel leaned into his hand with a quiet grunt like he understood every word. The next morning, things began to shift. A call came in from the front desk. The hospital had a visitor asking for Meline. A man, mid-50s, no ID, refused to give his name. Security said he didn't raise his voice, but there was something cold in his manner, something off. Jake didn't wait. He and Lana got in the cruiser and were at the hospital in 7 minutes flat. Diesel came with them, standing tall in the back seat, ears twitching like a radar tuned to danger. When they pulled up to the entrance, the man was gone. But security had the footage. They watched it together frame by frame. He stood just inside the lobby, hands in the pockets of a heavy coat, hood up. But the camera caught his face as he turned. Jake froze. It was McKinley. Same man who fostered Meline. Same man who told her no one would help her. The one she'd been running from. Back at the station, Jake slammed his palm on the desk. He knows she talked. Lana exhaled slowly. We need to move her. Fast, CPS agreed. By nightfall, Meline and Theo were relocated to a secure shelter on the outskirts of town under temporary protective custody. Lauren gave Jake a nod. This buys us time, but it doesn't make the threat go away. Jake didn't sleep that night either. He left the porch light on and Diesel sat by the door, eyes trained on the street all night long. The next day, Jake sat with Meline at the safe house. She looked tired, older than 15, like she'd aged a decade in a month. Do you know why he came to the hospital? Jake asked. Meline hesitated. He said, if I ever told anyone he'd take the baby. He always said Theo wasn't mine, that I didn't deserve him. He said he could do what he wanted. Jake's knuckles went white. Meline swallowed. He used to watch me, not just in the house. At night, I'd hear him standing outside my door. Jake felt his stomach turned. And now? He asked. I don't think he wants the baby anymore, she whispered. I think he wants to make sure I don't exist. Back at the precinct, Jake made sure the patrol car passed the Connor house every hour. But McKinley was gone. No credit cards, no cell ping, no traffic cams. Like he vanished. Jake looked down at Diesel. You think he's watching from somewhere? Diesel's ears lifted slightly, his body alert. Yeah, Jake muttered. Me too. That evening, Jake walked Diesel down Maple Lane again. Was snowing lightly. The street was empty, save for the crunch of boots and the jingle of Diesel's collar. They passed the exact spot where it all started, where Diesel had barked and refused to move, where Theo had been saved. Jake stopped. He looked down at Diesel. Why here? Why that moment? What told you something was wrong? Diesel didn't answer, of course. He just stared up at Jake with those ageless, knowing eyes. And Jake realized maybe it wasn't something Diesel heard or smelled. Maybe it was something he felt. Fear. Desperation. The cry that wasn't loud enough for a human ear, but somehow pierced the silence between souls. Back at home, Jake sat with a cup of coffee, gone cold. On the table was a manila folder. Inside were updates from CPS. Theo was doing better, gaining weight. Heart rate normal, no signs of withdrawal. Meline was approved for extended protective status, but there was a note at the bottom. Subject may be eligible for kinship placement with responsible adult pending background and capacity. Jake read it twice, then looked at the photo on his fridge. And Diesel from 5 years ago. One protector, one partner, and now maybe a chance to protect again. Not as a cop, not as a soldier, but as something else entirely. Outside, Diesel lifted his head. A car had just turned the corner. Slow, deliberate. Jake's body tensed. Diesel stood. The storm wasn't over yet. But they were ready because this time they weren't chasing evil. They were guarding something good, something worth barking for. The wind had a bite to it. That morning, one of those Midwest chills that seeps into your bones before you realize you've stopped moving. Jake stood outside the shelter gate with a hot cup of coffee in one hand, his other resting on Diesel's leash. He hadn't slept more than a couple hours, and Diesel hadn't stopped scanning the perimeter since sunrise. Still no sign of McKinley, Lana said as she pulled up beside him, tossing him a granola bar. You're going to need more than caffeine if you're going to make it through another shift. Jake caught it with a tired smile. I'll sleep when this is over. Lana leaned against the cruiser. You sure you're not getting too close? He didn't answer immediately, just looked at the building, tall, gray, quiet. Somewhere inside, Meline was holding her baby, trying to figure out how to heal after being made to feel disposable. She's a kid, Jake finally said. And she's doing more right now to protect that baby than most adults I've ever met. Lana sighed. You've got a soft spot. Jake shrugged. Diesel picked her. That's good enough for me. Diesel wagged his tail once, then settled back into a watchful crouch. Inside the shelter, Meline rocked Theo in her arms while a Soft lullaby played from a Bluetooth speaker. The boy's little hands were starting to grasp her hoodie strings. He was getting stronger every day, but Meline wasn't sleeping either. The counselor said she woke up every night around 3 a.m., the exact time she dropped Theo into the trash bin. Her nightmares weren't about what might have happened. They were about what almost did. Sometimes I think I'm still in that alley, she whispered during her latest check-in with Lauren Brandt. Like I'm stuck there. Like maybe that's where part of me broke off. Lauren was gentle but honest. Trauma doesn't vanish, but it can be turned into something new, something stronger. Meline looked down at Theo. He didn't ask for any of this. No, Lauren said, but you still chose to protect him, even when you were terrified. That matters more than you know. Back at the precinct, a call finally came in. A county gas station on Route 14 had reported a man matching McKinley's description, buying a burner phone and a bottle of whiskey around 2 a.m. Security footage confirmed it. Same coat, same build, same dead eyes. He's watching, Lana said as they reviewed the grainy footage. Waiting for the moment the system slips when we're not looking. Jake nodded. Then we don't stop looking. They flagged McKinley's face to every hotel and bus terminal within 150 miles. But Jake had a different plan. He pulled a favor from an old friend at the Department of Children's Services and requested temporary foster placement review. I'm not saying I want her to live with me yet, Jake told the director. But I'm saying if there's no one else, I'm not going to let her go back to people like him. The director paused. You know, that's a major step. Jake looked down at Diesel, who was asleep at his feet. I've made bigger leaps with less warning. That evening, Jake drove back to the shelter just as the sky turned a bruised shade of pink. Inside, he found Meline in the rec room drawing on a sketch pad. Theo was asleep nearby in a carrier. You ever draw anything not in pencil? Jake asked, sitting down beside her. He smiled a little. I like pencil.